All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Walks of Life podcast. I am Russell Smith, and today I am delighted to be joined by Sarah Landenwich, whose debut novel, The Fire Concerto, was published earlier this summer. Sarah is a friend and fellow Louisvillian, and I am very excited to be discussing her novel today. In fact, here's what I wrote about it a few weeks ago. This will go down as one of my very favorite books this year. I stayed up past 1 a.m. 3 nights in a row to finish the book. And let me say, for folks who know me, I'm not a night owl. This story, masterfully crafted by debut novelist Sarah Landenwich, kept me seeking more and my heart racing. What will happen next and next? My wife, also powerfully drawn into the story, sprinted through it too. And by the way, so did her mother. The novel is about music, mastery, loss, and renewal. Mostly, to me, it's saying about love. Can we love who we were and no longer are and never will be again? And can we love who we are and who we might become? Can we reach out to something or someone to walk that tense tightrope, the weaving of past, present, and future with us? Can we love what we find inside of us, but also open our eyes and love to what we discover outside of us? Beyond beautiful, I cannot recommend it highly enough. So that's what I wrote as a review a few weeks ago. With that, Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. I love how you really encapsulate the theme of this book, which is about coming back after a dream is lost.
I think that's a wonderful place to start, Sarah. Why don't we kick off? Can you just give us an overview of the book?
Sure. So, The Fire Concerto is a story about a brilliant female musician lost to history and another woman's quest to ensure she is not forgotten. And it follows a woman named Clara Bishop, who was a former concert pianist until her hand and arm were badly burned in a concert hall fire. And she's working as a bartender in Austin, Texas, when her piano teacher dies and leaves her an unexpected inheritance: an ornate 19th century metronome with a cryptic message hidden inside its box. Clara soon comes to discover that this is the long lost metronome of a famous romantic composer, a priceless object that has been missing for over 100 years since the composer was killed by one of his pupils, a very talented female musician alleged to have been insane. And Clara doesn't know what this metronome is about, how her teacher came to possess it, why the teacher gave it to Clara, and all of these questions spur her on an investigation that takes her to Warsaw, where the composer lived and died, to uncover the truth about what really happened the night of his death.
I love it, Sarah. As you were going through it, I was just thinking back to the novel, and episodes kept coming back to me. It was like reliving the novel. That was amazing.
Great. I love that.
I want to know, why did you write this book? Why did you write this novel?
So the short answer is I wrote it because I wanted to read this story. So there's an old adage in writing to write the book you want to read. And in my case, that's what I did. So I really adore a novel called Possession. This is a novel published in the 90s by A.S. Byatt. And it's a book that follows two literary scholars in the present as they uncover a secret love affair between two Victorian poets in the past. And I just adore this book. And I thought, I really want to write the possession for classical music. No one's done that. No one has really, there are several really fantastic books about classical music, but none that explore like a mystery in that way. And so I thought, I'm going to write the book I want to read.
That brings up another question. Did you write this only for you, or who did you write this book for?
That's such a great question. So when I was first writing it, when I wrote the first draft, I was definitely writing it just for me. When I'm drafting a new story, I think of myself as both the storyteller and the first recipient because I don't necessarily know where the story is going. I have a general idea, but I don't know all the twists and turns that it's going to take. And that's one of the great pleasures of writing is creating something from nothing. So for me, the first draft is this very exciting experience of just following your imagination, chasing it down, right? So the first draft I wrote for me, and then I don't start thinking about the reader until the second draft, which is when I start working on structure and how I'm going to organize the material, how I'm going to reveal or unravel the mystery one step at a time. And then it's more of an outside lens, right? I shift from just having fun to thinking what's going to be fun for the reader.
You talked a little bit about how the idea of this book came to you, and I'd love to hear more if there's more. And you just began pulling on a thread I'd love to hear more about, which is how did you go about bringing this idea to life?
Sure. So it happened over the course of many revisions, really. So the originating idea of this book was to follow three female pianists, one in the 19th century, one in the early 20th century, and one in modern times, who were connected not through a blood relationship, but through what in classical music is called one's musical ancestry.
Mm.
Musical ancestry is also sometimes called pedagogical lineage. And the idea of this is that you, as a musician, trace your teaching history back many generations. So, who was your teacher's teacher? Who was that teacher's teacher? And the idea of it is to, in a way, see where you have come from, what has influenced the way you've been taught, and possibly as a result, the way that you play. For sports fans, this is in some ways similar to a coaching tree. And in literature, I'm a writer, I'm a great reader, I love to read. One of my favorite types of books to read is a book that follows generations of families and
Mm.
how certain incidents in the past follow us through life and even past us into our future generations. And I think this is such a fascinating topic, but I had never seen in literature explored what we inherit, not from our family, but from the teachers in our lives that can, in some ways, be almost as influential, if not more, than our familial relationships. So I thought that would be a really fascinating premise as a way to organize a book.
It sounds religious, almost like Buddhist, about tracing your lineage from teacher to teacher back through the ages. And that lineage is something that keeps the spark of the teaching, the spark of the tradition alive. I love that idea.
Yeah, I do too. But for me, as a novelist, what's even more fascinating is the way that trauma can be passed down, which is a
Mm.
significant element of this book. As so, someone asked me recently if I was thinking of generational trauma when I wrote this book, and I said, not exactly, but I was thinking of what William Faulkner said, that the past is never dead, it's not even past. Because in this book, there is an originating relationship between the famous composer and the woman who kills him. And this act of violence has repercussions over generations, over many decades, that's affecting my protagonist in the present. And
Mm.
I do think of history as being in that kind of repercussion pattern, right? There are so many ways that we are influenced by the past that we don't even know.
1,000%, yes.
Yeah.
1,000%, yeah. But can we come back to this question of pedagogical lineage. I'd love
Sure.
to talk more a little bit about that and your lineage later on. But I want to keep going down this train of the actual writing of the book, the structuring of the book, the publishing of the book. Talk to us a little bit about the process of finding an agent, finding a publisher. How did all that happen? How did that come about?
Yeah, that was a really long process that took years, many years. So the condensed story is that The Fire Concerto, though it is my debut novel, is not my first book. I wrote a whole other book before this. I worked on it for 5 years, and then I tried to get an agent for that. For listeners who are unaware, if you as a writer are trying to approach a big publisher, you don't do that yourself. You have to have a representative for you called a literary agent. And in order to get a literary agent, you have to write what's called a query letter, which is a one-page cover letter that essentially says, this is what my book is about. This is the genre. This is the word count. I hope you'll read it. And usually you include the first chapter. And if they like the first chapter, they're like, okay, maybe I'll read the first 50 pages. And then maybe I'll read the full manuscript. It's a long process in itself. But getting an agent is very difficult because you as a writer don't pay an agent. They take a percentage of your sales. So it's like a real estate agent, right? Like you need them, but it's really hard to get a good one because there aren't as many literary agents as there are real estate agents by any stretch of the imagination. So for my first book, I tried and got really close, but never got an agent. And then I wrote this book, and I got an agent quickly when I queried. I got a big agent in London, and I was like, amazing, I've made it. And when I signed with her, she said, there's a couple things I think you should change. They were very minor. And I said, great. And then we were going to take it on submission, which means submitting it to publishers in 3 months. And then she got back to me a couple of weeks later and was like, actually, I read it again, and I think you need to change a few more things. And essentially wrote me a revision letter that was rewrite this book. And I was so devastated. I was like, oh my gosh, I would not have signed with you if we had discussed this. But at that point in my career and in my life, I think I felt stuck. Like I'd already signed the contract. I had withdrawn my queries from other people. This was a big agent. So I felt, okay, I have to go with you and just trust you. So I made all these revisions, turned it back in months later. And she said, oh, so good. I love all this stuff. But now I want you to change all this other stuff. And we went on in this manner for 19 months. And when I finished what I thought was my last draft and turned it in, she wrote to me in an email and said, no one's going to buy this book. You and I are finished. And I was devastated because not only had my dreams been so high and then so dashed, but also I'd spent all this time making a lot of revisions, some of which I didn't like on this manuscript. And I also didn't know at that point that you can essentially get fired from one agent and still find another one, because that's not something a lot of people talk about. But guess what? You can. I was really upset for a while, but I was like, I'm not going to quit. Like, I've made it this far. And I decided to requery agents. This time I only queried agents in the US. Most of them are in New York. And I thought, okay, here we go. I'm going to give this book one last try. And I sent out my queries, and in 2 weeks I had 6 offers, which is unheard of. Not unheard of, but that's a lot. It's like in the story of my career, that's like the moment where the underdog team wins the championship because it's like a huge comeback. And at that point, not only did I have some more savvy from having a prior relationship with an agent that I didn't jive very well with, but also I got to pick. I got to interview all these people and pick the one that felt the best for me. And the agent that I have now is such a phenomenal agent and a phenomenal person, and I could not be happier with him. And I feel so lucky that everything worked out the way that it did, though it was not a fun process along the way.
Huh. Can I ask? I'm just curious, in that process of interviewing those 6 agents who had made those offers, what did you care about in those interviews? What were you looking for as you decided to hire an agent?
Good question. Because of the benefit of what I'd learned from agent number one, the first
Mm,
question I asked all of them is, what do you think I should change? And I wanted specifics, like very specifics. Tell me, and this is every agent will have you change stuff, right? There's no agent that's going to say, let's just mail it out tomorrow. So I asked them a lot of questions about that. I asked, who do you envision the reader for this book being? Because this novel, what I think is a great benefit of it crosses some genres. It's a
mm,
literary novel, but it has a historical element and also a historical mystery element. And all the agents that I interviewed had a different idea of where it would fit in the market. And some of those didn't feel as good of a fit to me as others. For instance, one agent was a great agent, but she said, I see this as really smart, upscale women's fiction. And I was like, I don't even like the category of women's fiction. It implies that, I don't know. To me, I'm just frustrated by that term in general. What, men can't read it? What, like, women can't read the other fiction? I don't get it. But I didn't really want to see it there. And I saw this book as literary fiction, upmarket literary fiction. Upmarket is a publishing term for literary fiction with a plot.
mm.
And the agent that I ended up with is known for being really good at selling upmarket fiction. And he also was just so transparent. He's very tenured in his career, and he was really honest. And I value that so much, especially after my experience with the first agent. And I also learned through that bad experience, but also just through life, people who don't feel like they have a lot to prove are willing to put their cards on the table.
Mm,
And I want to work with somebody like that.
mm. Yeah, as I told you early on, as I wrote in my review, I love this book. My wife loved this book. It's very interesting to me after I published the review a few weeks ago. Everyone who's written me back that, hey, Russ, thanks for the book suggestions, and I bought the Fire Concerto, has been a man.
So interesting.
I know. I found that so fascinating. I think it is not only for women. It's an amazing novel, period, not only for one subset of people.
Yeah. And I feel that way too. And not just for this book, but I feel like a lot of times there's sometimes a barrier still of male readers reading women's fiction, which I wish wasn't there. And that's makes me feel really good to hear that men are buying
Yeah,
and reading the book. That's great.
yeah, totally. Yeah. I want to ask you a couple questions kind of about how you go about writing. I'm a writer, I have my own sort of shtick and way and routine and all this stuff. And I'm just fascinated by other people's. So on your website, you have a picture of an old Corona typewriter. I'm just fascinated. Do you use that? And tell us about the tools of your trade.
Yeah, I love that typewriter. I do not use it. That typewriter belonged to my husband's grandmother, and she used it while an undergraduate at the University of Kentucky during World War II. That was
Wow.
her college typewriter, which is awesome.
That's totally awesome.
Yeah, so I just adore it. I have it on my bookshelf like a as a bookend, really. I just like to look at it. But my tools are even more antiquated than that, Russell. I write with pen and paper. I write on yellow legal pads. Oh, yes. Okay. So do you. Yeah, I buy bulk pad like quantities of yellow legal pads, and I write by hand all of my first drafts.
How did you do your research? This is a heavily researched book. How did you capture all of that? How did you organize all of your research?
I made an annotated bibliography. So thank you, English teachers of the past who taught me how to do that. And also, halfway through this book, when I realized I had so many sources and so much research, and I was starting, even with my annotated bibliography, to lose track, I started doing something which on the novel I'm writing now, I started truly on page one, which is I add footnotes while
Mm.
I am writing to just remind myself of what source I am referencing at this moment so that later I can go back to it. And that to me was one of the best lessons I learned from writing the Fire Concerto is to annotate as I go because it
Mm.
takes years to write a book and there's so many drafts. Half of them get thrown out or whatever. It gets really confusing to keep track of all the pieces and the parts and the drafts, and annotating it in real time helps keep the research straight. The annotated bibliography is also essential just to keep a list of the sources running because for the Fire Concerto, it took me about 3 years to write. So by year 3, I had forgotten some of the books that I'd gotten from the library in year 1. And then I had to go back through my library record, which was such a pain. So now I'm very organized about it. If I get a book, I write it on the annotated bib and then I write like the summary that we were taught to write in school about the source. And then I start footnoting in the text itself.
So do you read the sources all the way through, or are you more surgical going through looking for specific things that you think that book will tell you?
I'm usually surgical unless it's a volume that's just like a general thing that I don't know enough about. For instance, an example of that would be for this book, The Fire Concerto, part of it is set in Warsaw in both in the 90s, the 1990s, but also the 1870s, 1880s. I knew zero about Warsaw in both of those periods. So I read this tome on the history of Poland called God's Playground, A History of Poland by Norman Davies.
Mm.
And I had to read that pretty much that whole book, at least from the beginning through the 20th or mid 20th century.
Mm.
But usually I try to be surgical. And with many sources, you can be, but some more obscure details, you have to really dig for them.
Tell us a little bit about your writing habits, your routines. Do you have a place? Do you have a time? All those things.
Yeah, so I usually write at my desk, which is where I am right now. And when I'm writing a first draft, I write longhand, as I said, and I have this amazing, I won't hold it up for you since the listeners can't see it either, but I have a writing board, an old fashioned slant board that my husband made me. It is beautiful. And I use that so that I'm not like hunched over, like with my neck down. So I use that when I am writing. And when I'm drafting a new work, I try to write 4 pages in a legal pad every day. And 4 pages is roughly 1,200 words or so. And I get to my 4 pages and then I consider the drafting work for the day done. After that point, it gets worse. There are some writers, Stephen King started the idea in his book on writing that you should write 2,000 words a day. That takes a long time, first of all, and it's an arbitrary number. Some people could write 2,000 words and still be writing good material at that point. Not me. Like 1,000 words is my sweet spot. So I write 4 pages. And when it's time to move to the second draft, which is when I start digitizing all those notebooks, then I'm just at my computer for as many hours as I can be there.
How are you in the initial draft? How are you balancing research and the writing? Are you taking an outline and then writing pieces and then inserting research as you go back? Are you researching later in the day when you're tired of writing? I'm fascinated by how do you balance the research and writing side of this?
Usually I write the first draft without doing too much research, and that's
Mm.
intentional. So normally, the first draft for me, the goal is to tell a great story. And sometimes if you do too much research early on, you feel very beholden to facts and the historical record, and that gets in the way of the imagination. And
Mm.
I'm not saying that means you should include incorrect material or disregard the historical record. But for me, the first draft is tell a great story. And then after the first draft, look into the research and see, okay, which of these details needs to be adjusted to be historically accurate? how much of this story needs to be adjusted for that. Because my job, as I see it, is to, for first and foremost, to tell a great story, not to educate someone on a historical time period, although obviously I hope that happens too along the way. So I make the research the second thing I do so that it doesn't interfere with the storytelling. Now, that definitely does mean sometimes I've made a big mess for myself that I have to rewrite a section or whatever. But to me,
Mm,
that's worth it
mm.
to let the imagination really do its job and just go as far as it can go.
Fascinating. That's awesome. I want to ask you a few questions about the book itself. Let's dive into the book itself. One thing that struck me, and you mentioned this, the book takes place in Austin, Texas, in Chicago, in Warsaw, Poland. I found those intriguing choices. It's not New York, London, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tokyo. Why'd you choose those locations?
The story kind of just took me there, honestly. I didn't intentionally choose those choices and I resisted some of them. So, Austin was chosen because after I knew what this story would be and I had crafted a general idea of who my modern day protagonist would be, the woman who would become Clara Bishop, who was the child prodigy, now bartender with the burned arm and hand. Before I knew she was burned, I knew that there had been an injury that had
Hmm.
ended her career, but I wasn't sure what the injury was yet. So I was just looking around for what that would be. I keep a notebook of observations of things that I see or want to write about or whatever. And I was just looking back through that notebook and I found this note from several years ago. I think it was 2015 or 2016, where I had written a note to myself that said, "The bartender in Austin with Bell's palsy." And this references a trip that I took with my husband to Austin back in 2016, 2015. And I went to a bar, ordered a Manhattan, which is my drink of choice. And the lovely young woman who was my bartender had facial paralysis on one side of her face. And she was a really striking figure because she was really beautiful and half of her face was paralyzed. And a lot of people were looking at her, right? And I thought, wow, what an interesting
Hmm.
job to have where every
Hmm.
other person is someone who's just going to stare at you. And at the same time, there was this guy sitting next to me at the bar who was trying so hard to flirt with her. And he seemed to know her somehow, like maybe he was a regular at the bar. And she was just shutting him down like at every second. And I couldn't tell because I wasn't there long enough to be like, is this guy a jerk that she can't stand? Or is she just a really guarded person? I didn't know, but she really intrigued me. And so years later, when I found that in my notebook, I thought, ugh, what if my protagonist is a bartender? And what if it's not Bell's palsy, but she has burn scars on her face that also burned her hand and her arm, and that's her career ending injury. And after that, it just seemed like I had to set the book in Austin because I just kept seeing her there. So it was random.
That's amazing. I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. I want to take up this burn that Clara Bishop endured before the happenings of the book. This is a bit of a long question, but I want to connect it to that word burn and what happened to Clara. As I kept reading this book, another book kept coming to mind. Everyone remembers Norman Maclean as the author of A River Runs Through It. He also wrote a book of nonfiction, Young Men and Fire. It's about the wildfire on August 5th, 1949, in Man Gulch, Montana. And that fire killed 12 of the first 15 firefighters who responded. And these weren't young, sort of hotshot recruits, bravado, and careless. They were seasoned, tough firefighters. Most of them had been paratroopers in World War II. They had a lot of experience in hard, bad, tough, gnarly, uncertain circumstances. And yet, fire possesses qualities that do not obey human laws or wishes. The characters in your book, they have scars, mental and physical, from fire or music or both? And I suspect you titled the book The Fire Concerto quite deliberately. In your mind, how does music relate to fire? And why did you give the book that title?
That is a fascinating question. I'm really intrigued by that Norma McLean book that you talk about. I've never read that. I read A River Runs Through It, but I haven't read that one. But I lived in the West for many years. I lived in Colorado for 14 years, where fire is a real threat and a really terrifying one. So that book sounds very interesting. The relationship between music and fire is not one that I necessarily put together in my mind, at least not consciously. But the fire concerto in the book is a piece of music that has earned its name because it's really passionate and fiery, but also because of its tempo marking. So every piece of classical music has a tempo marking that tells the musicians how fast or slow to play it. And one tempo marking, one of my favorite ones to see on any piece, is Allegro con fuoco, which literally means fast with fire. And in the fictional world of the Fire Concerto, the novel, the piece that the concerto that becomes the centerpiece of some of these characters' lives has that tempo marking, Allegro con fuoco. So that's how the book got its title, because there's a fire that burns Clara. The composer in the book has this really fiery personality. There's a lot of passion, a lot of violence, volatility. So it just felt like it matched.
I love that. I want to follow that up with another theme that I mentioned in my review. I mentioned that I think your book is a lot about love in transition, about love in distortion. And I just want to hear you talk a little bit more about the theme of love in the book.
Yeah, there are a lot of different loves in the book, right? Love between people, obviously, familial love, especially mother daughter, romantic love, and also the love of music or the love of a pursuit, such as playing music. And one of the things that's interesting to me, both as a person and as a writer, is the ways that love can take forms that we don't recognize. Because a lot of times in life, we all want to be loved the way that we want to be loved, right? But no one necessarily knows what that is. And people show love differently. So, for instance, in the book, Madame, Clara's teacher, who is in the novel a very cruel, demanding person, as the reader comes to see as the book goes on, is more complicated than that. And she cares deeply about her students, but her way of showing it is not what makes them feel loved.
Mm.
And I think that's such an interesting idea, the way that people show love in different ways. And sometimes we don't see it as love at all because, in truth, intentions matter, but actions matter more, right? And we see this all the time in life, right? People doing what they quote unquote think is best. And this isn't best for a lot of people, but okay. Those varying ideas of what it means to be good, what it means to love, what it means to be a person of integrity. We all have different
Mm.
ideas of that.
Mm. This is so much like a Peter Drucker point, the management guru from the mid to late 20th century. He harped continually on communication is not just what you want to say, but what did the receiver hear? What did they actually understand? What did they actually receive? And you're talking about Madame trying to transmit love, and it's not picked up like love at all.
No. Yeah. And
Mm.
some of that is people who have a lot of emotional baggage from their own life, their own traumas. If you don't work on that and work through it, it's hard to be close to anybody.
You just said something that I found so fascinating. You mentioned mother-daughter relationships, and there are a number of mother-daughter relationships, or let's say mother-like figure daughter relationships. The relationship between Clara and her mother is intense. The relationship between Clara and Madame, the piano instructor, is
Bad.
challenging,
Yeah.
bad. There are others. What are readers going to find in these relationships between mother and daughter or mother like figures and daughter? And what are you saying about how we might bring out the best in ourselves and those we love?
There are so many different mother-daughter relationships in this book. And actually, I wrote the discussion questions that are at the end of the book, and one of them is about the different mother-daughter relationships. And recently I've been visiting a lot of book clubs and talking to people
Mm,
about it, and that's a topic that comes up every single time,
mm,
is people sharing their own feelings or stories about their mothers.
mm.
And I think it's because there are so many different types of relationships shown in this novel between mother and daughter, but all of them at heart have a very deep love for their daughters. But again, the way they show it is not always not always beneficial on the other
Yeah.
end. And I feel I'm a parent, I feel so attuned to the ways that how is my behavior shaping my daughter's behavior. I think about that all the time. And in so many ways, you just don't know. You just don't know. Because even in families, even in a bond that close between mother and child, personalities differ. And it's one of those relationships that I think will be fascinating to me forever.
I agree. I think so.
And also, along those lines, I feel that one of the things I feel powerfully about is the way that in this book, the idea of someone, whether that's a mother or someone from the past, is often based on the way we perceive them and how they treated us. And we forget, especially in families sometimes, that our elders, that our ancestors, were not just members of our family, they were people out in the world. And that our mothers and grandmothers and great grandmothers were once girls who had aspirations of their own, who had dreams, who may have done remarkable things that we don't know about.
Mm,
And that's something that I've written essays about. And I talk, when I visit book clubs, I talk about that a lot too. Is just how women's stories are often reduced to their role in a family, especially women in previous generations. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't something else there.
I think that's a really good segue to another set of questions I'm curious about. As I read the book, I felt an underlying emotion, not anger, but maybe sadness, maybe hurt, maybe disappointment that your book is a work of fiction, but it could be true. Women, geniuses of music, art of all kinds, being unknown, as you just said, unknown to their contemporaries, their achievements unrecognized, forgotten to history. Tell us more about that in your view and as a motivating force for the novel.
Yeah, it was such a motivating force for the novel. There are so many women who have been either totally forgotten about or were never recorded in the first place for their achievements. And this is tragic to me. All of the women who may have done something really fantastic, especially given the odds that were stacked against them at most of the times in history. And so many of them, we don't even know who they are. And for instance, when I was doing research for this book, I found this great resource of female Polish composers of the 19th century. And it was this great list of all these different women. And what struck me so much about this list is that for a great majority of them, there is so little information that there aren't even clear birth dates, death dates, places of residence. And on so many of them too, it says work has been lost. We know they wrote this piece. No one knows where it is. And that, just think of it, right? What great works of art have just been lost. We think of Emily Dickinson and her poems, right, getting published after her death. What if they had never gotten here to us? And the answer is there's other stuff like that has never gotten to us and never will. And that became a big theme of this book, is the forgotten female artist whose reputation may have been either a poor reputation or who was forgotten altogether. And for that reason, almost all of the characters in this book, the names are names that are tributes to actual female musicians and scholars of the 19th century who are largely unknown.
You mentioned some of them, the forgotten female composers, musicians, especially of the Romantic period, who helped form some of the characters. I just love to learn more about some of them. Who are they? Tell us more about even just a couple of them, who they are, what they did. I want to know more about them.
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So probably the most well-known female musician of the 19th century is Clara Schumann. Clara Schumann was the wife of Robert Schumann, the famous composer. He is, of course, the more famous of the two of them. Clara Schumann was a prodigy as a child, a great performer. Her father was a prominent teacher, and he took her on tour, showing her off. Look at what my daughter can do. And she was really revered for her talent. But she also wanted to compose music. And when she was a kid, she was, I think, 18 years old, she wrote a concerto that is awesome. And people were like, maybe her dad helped her write it. They didn't take it seriously. And she really internalized those ideas and didn't really pursue a career in composition. She performed until her 80s. She lived a long life, but she didn't really compose that much and didn't let many of her compositions out into the world until later in her life, if I'm not mistaken. But what she did do was promote her husband's work. So her husband, Robert Schumann, died in his 40s, and she spent most of the rest of her life playing his work, telling people about his work. And guess what? He's famous now. He was famous in his time too, but she really helped cement his reputation. And then there are many lesser known women of that century. Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel is one. So she's the sister of Felix Mendelssohn, the famous composer. They were very close, great friends their whole life. And she was, by some accounts, the far more talented composer of the two of them, especially when they were children. But the family did not believe that Fanny should be presenting her compositions out in the world, even though she wrote a great many of them. And her father dissuaded her from doing it. And her brother, which is so sad to me, also dissuaded her from doing that. But he published some of them under his own name because he thought they were good, right? And then she, at the end of her short life, decided, I am going to publish these. And luckily she did. And then she died when she was 43. Another shortened life. These are just two examples of so many that I could go on and on about. And it's like, if you listen, for instance, to Fanny Mendelssohn's work, which I did make a playlist for this book and her work is featured on there, it's fantastic. But a lot of people haven't heard it.
Sarah, you end the book, it's a work of fiction, but you end the book with a historical note. As I found the novel, I found that writing beautiful and evocative. And I find myself going back to that historical note frequently since I finished the book. I would just love to hear in your voice the last 3 paragraphs of that historical note. Take us through it. I think my listeners would love to hear you read it. It's just beautiful, and I just love for us to be able to sink into it for a few minutes.
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you. So the historical note, it's called The Truth Behind Alexander Starza and the Fire Concerto, and it talks about the various true, real people, composers of the 19th century who influenced the writing of this book. And I'm going to pick up about halfway through, where, and this is after I've talked about many of the women who inspired the character Constantia Pleyel, who is the great murderess of this novel. More than these nominal tributes, it is Constantia Pleyel's struggle to be a woman artist that is real. Many music enthusiasts have heard of Clara Schumann, the 19th century pianist and composer whose musical achievements are beyond mythic when we consider what she was up against: pervasive sexism, money troubles, the death of multiple children, an insane husband. Yet for every Clara Schumann whose name has endured into the 21st century, there are 1,000 unknown composers like Tekla Berezjewska-Baranovska. This tragic omission illustrates one of the greatest vulnerabilities of making art. There is always the risk of obscurity, of no one reading that novel or hearing that piece, of the brilliant painting collecting dust in an attic trunk. This, as much as any divine inspiration, is the artist's contract. There are no guarantees. The ultimate truth behind Alexander Starza and Constantia Pleyel, as well as Frédéric Chopin and Robert and Clara Schumann, is their struggle to create, and to do despite self-doubt, financial duress, loss of patronage, illness, and grief. It is a struggle to find meaning in life's challenges, to take our pain and make from it beauty, as Starza would say, and to persevere despite obstacles. That is the life art teaches us to live. Creative expression is born from a desire to express in tangible form this wild human experience in a way someone else might understand. The creative act has power to provoke transformation and joy, sometimes for the artist alone, and that in itself is enough to make it worthwhile, but sometimes too for the reader, viewer, or listener, miles or centuries away, who finds for a brief time that same transformation and joy tunneling, perhaps just barely perceptibly, into their heart.
I loved all that. It's just so beautiful. I
Well, thank
just
you.
the sentiment, the truth about creating art and giving rise to something within your own heart that you have to get out, whatever the cost,
Yeah, it
whatever the
takes,
sacrifice.
yeah, I tell people, especially young people, it takes courage to make real art, right?
I want to end our time, Sarah, with a few questions going back to something you brought up really early on, pedagogical lineage. And I'd love to hear just who are your most important musical influences?
You know what? So my pedagogical lineage can actually be traced back to Franz Liszt, the composer, which sounds more distinguished than it is because he lived a long life and taught many pupils over the course of that long life. So there are many Liszt descendants. So I am unremarkable in that way. But my greatest musical influences are my teacher, who was such a phenomenal person. Nothing at all like the cruel teacher in the book. Nothing at all. But who was one of those people who always believed that I was better than I was. You know what I mean? And because of that, I became that. And also my older sister. So my older sister played piano. We had a piano in our home. Me and all my sisters took lessons. But my older sister was really talented. And because she was older than me, she was much further along than me. And when I was a kid, she was the bar that I was trying to reach.
Who are your writing influences?
So I really love storytelling that is written with a literary, like a poetic sensibility. So a great plot with beautiful writing. And for me, writers who really do that are Louise Erdrich, who's one of my favorite writers. Barbara Kingsolver also checks that box for me. I also will read anything published by George Saunders or Ann Patchett. And I also really love the writer Kent Harif. I think I've read all of his work. I just love it. He writes so differently than I do, but it's just exquisite.
I love those writers who you read them and they're very different than you are, and you don't want to model them, but you just love soaking in their excellence,
Yeah,
their path, their way, their ability to do their craft.
same. I feel the same way about George Saunders. Every time I read him, I'm like, I don't want to write like you, but I love just living in your head for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's the joy of the diversity of the arts. And within each particular art, there's just so much ability to create in your own way that
Hmm.
people will appreciate.
Yeah.
What book are you reading now?
Right now, I am reading, since my book came out, I've met a lot of writers through literary events, book festivals type of thing. And I've heard from a lot of writers who said, I've read your book. So I'm trying to read the books of all of the writers who have read my book, which is
Oh,
taking a long time. So at this exact moment, I am reading a nonfiction book called How to Be Well by
hmm.
Amy LaRocca. This is a fantastic expose of the wellness industry and its
Hmm.
like insidious roots, really. I met her at
Hmm.
the Kentucky Book Festival and she got my book and I got her book. And I really love this book. It's like perfect for someone like me who's susceptible to the belief that we can all like be fantastic if only we do all the latest trends, right? Meditate all day and do yoga and what have you. And I'm also reading in fiction, I'm reading a novel by Martha Ann Toll called Duet for One. And since the beginning of this year, I've also been making my way through Mary Oliver's poetry collection, Devotions. And I'm about 2/3 of the way through now.
Is she your favorite poet?
I don't think she's my favorite, but she's definitely up there. Top five.
Hmm. Who else is in the top five? I got to know.
Okay, let's see. Billy Collins, for sure. I love
Hmm.
him.
Yep.
Jack Gilbert. Probably the favorite poem of all time for me is a poem by Jack Gilbert called Failing and Flying, which
Hmm.
is to me like one of the best poems ever written. I really like Galway Kinnell, and I'm a huge fan of Walt Whitman.
Whitman. Read them every year on 4th of July. Amazing. Can't go
Never
wrong.
disappoints. Yeah.
Nope. Can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong with some Whitman in your life. All right, Sarah, let me ask you two last questions.
Okay.
This is a newsletter. I don't want to quite say it's not all about walking. I write a lot about walking. I read a lot about walking for health or walking downtown and all these different things. I'm just curious about how walking is a part of your life or is not part of your life and what role it plays, if any.
It's actually a huge part of my life. So this is a very interesting question. No one's ever asked me this before. But I walk a lot, like 3 or 4 times a week. And for me, it's like a reflection time. So it's also
Mm.
exercise, obviously. But I have this like ritual during my walks. So I'd say the first mile of my walk is like a emotional dump of the day. It's like whatever I've got on my mind or worries or whatever, I'm just like thinking of them and getting that out. And then I spend the rest of the time either in spiritual reflection or in working on writing out loud. So I talk to myself during my walk, which probably makes me look like a lunatic. At least now there's like the pretense of headphones, but I truly am just I'm trying to get if I'm working on a passage, I'm trying to get the language right. I'll just be like saying it out loud and whatever. And that's how I spend like the majority of my walks is working with language. And I love
So when
it.
you go for a walk, yeah. So how long do you go for? An hour, 2 hours, 10 miles? Like how
Just
long do you usually go for?
just like an hour.
Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's cathartic for me. I used to walk for exercise, and now I'm like, I gotta go for a walk for mental health and professional reasons. I gotta get this idea going because I've always found that you can't just stare at your computer and wait for ideas to come. That never works. And for me, they always come when I'm moving. So if I leave and go for a walk and I'm trying not to think about what's going to happen next in my book, that's when I find out what's going to happen next in the book. And so I always have my phone with me, and I often am like recording feverishly into my phone as I walk and then mumbling to myself like a crazy person. But I don't care because it's so productive. I get so much done on a walk.
Excuse me, ma'am, are you okay? Okay.
I'm like daring somebody to ask me.
Yeah, excuse me. What's wrong with you?
Right.
What's wrong? Are you okay? Oh man, I love that. What a great reflection. What a great reflection. All right, last question. I can go on for hours, but last question for this. And you waved at this very early on, but I'd just love to hear you talk more about how has this experience of writing a book and getting it published going to influence your next book, your life, your creative art?
That's a good question. I think I don't know yet because it's still so fresh. What I have found along the course of my writing career is that I learn so much at every step, often as one does by making mistakes or by saying like, I wish next time I would do it differently. But this is the first time I've published a book, and I feel like I'm still just immersed in it right now to know how to apply those lessons later. But I did learn a lot from the writing of this book that I am currently applying to the writing of my current book, namely in terms of the things that I was talking about earlier about organizing material, these logistical things that can really take up so much time if you let them slip away. That's been really helpful. But also, I think one thing that's happened is there's a different level of confidence that I made it, right? For so many years, I've been trying to get here. And there were so many times where it seemed like I would never get here. And now I'm here, and it's great. And it's okay. I need to trust myself more that I belong here. Because there was a time where I felt, oh, like I'm not good enough. Like my book shouldn't get published. It's not, I don't deserve this. And I'm glad, I think that everybody has those kinds of doubts at some point. And I'm glad that at least for now, that particular suite of doubts for me is over. And it makes me feel more confidence in my process, which is not the most efficient process. Like I will definitely say that, but it's the one that works for me. And I'm just trusting more in my creative intuition.
Okay, I have two more questions.
Great.
Just very briefly in a sentence, two sentences, tell us what you're working on next.
Sure. I'm working on another past present narrative. This one is set in 2022 and 1881 in rural Indiana. So no Polish research required. And it is also has nothing to do with music. But it does carry on this theme of women who have been wrongly remembered.
And that brings up my last question. When that book comes out, will you come back on the podcast to talk with me about that book?
Of course. I would love to. I would love to.
That would be awesome. I would love, love, love that, Sarah. That'd be awesome.
I would be
Well,
happy to come back.
this has been just a super fun conversation for me. As I told you, I love the book. It'll definitely be my top book of the year, maybe top two, but very high up in my books for the year. It was incredible. I loved it. I've loved our conversation, and I'm just really appreciative and really grateful you would join me today. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. This has been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed your questions.
All right. Take care.
You too.